Project 2025. Ooh, scary. So we have Mein Kampf, Das Kapital, and Project 2025. What do these have in common with each other? Well, other than they're all very boring. Uh, uh, this Project 2025 is a snooze fest, and a lot of what's being reported out there as is at best fabricated. It's not particularly as scary as what people want to try to make it out to be. So this comes out of the Heritage Foundation. Who are these guys? Well, I don't have a particularly, yeah. They've been around since 1975, and they've created a policy statement like this every 4 years since they became into existence. The guide itself looks almost identical to the first guide that came out because virtually nothing they suggested in 1980 and 1984 got changed. So it's the same old stuff. Uh, the impact has been minimal to non existent. They're a typical DC think tank that conservatives use for talking points, but not actually enacting legislation. Now, if we look at the guide itself, and I read through it, uh, it's a rough read because it's really deep policy wink stuff. It's both. Okay, so uh, essentially it gets into really nuts and bolts details of things, but none of it is particularly radical. Uh, my viewpoints are very, very much, if you look at the way I would like government run, my viewpoints would be far more radical than this. So I'm not sure where this is all coming from. Now, the guide itself, let's say you were a person planning on being in charge of the government and you knew nothing about it. This is actually pretty good to give you an idea how things work. Uh, like, yeah, so like, let's say you were a Libertarian Party candidate or uh, socialist or some third party independent who didn't have a lot of understanding of how government worked. This actually lays out a good blueprint explaining how everything works, explaining how the office of the president is set up, how personal management is set up, how the whole general executive branch works. And so, from that point of view, it's pretty good. Since I'm not planning on taking over the government anytime soon, it was kind of a slog. So there were points where I did do a lot of scanning, but there were things uh, that I made a point of looking up keywords throughout because there are things that are being said out uh, in the Twitter sphere and other places that are just total nonsense. Uh, there are claims out there saying that this policy alters Social Security in a meaningful way. Uh, there is nothing in here that talks about Social Security. Social Security is mentioned a couple of times, and it's basically side policy stuff. There's nothing that actually talks about changing it, and there's literally no numbers involved. Same thing goes for VA benefits, which also people are claiming that this thing cuts. And in fact, there's nothing in there that talks about changing how VA benefits work, and there's no numbers. Now, what makes this probably interesting to a certain extent in terms of political effectiveness, and probably why, assuming this isn't entirely just a look over here and not over there type of thing, is because of the plum list. Now, uh, essentially, the plum list was created for the Eisenhower administration. When Eisenhower came into office, Republicans literally had not been in charge of the executive branch for 20 years. So they were unaware of what positions they could fill coming in through the door. So they created something called the plum list. And that plum list has been generated for every new administration since. Now, Trump was a total noob when he came in 2016, and he didn't understand how things worked. And so, for the most part, he ignored the plum list. He allowed the Republican Party to fill it, and basically, it was the progressives of the Republican Party who kneecapped Trump from the get go. They filled the list with people who were basically going to prevent him from getting anything done. And so this cost him dearly. And there's lots of other positions that he didn't know how to fill that otherwise that the GOP essentially filled with people who would cause him problems, or didn't cue him to get rid of people from the Democrat side who he definitely needed to get rid of. So that's why the Trump administration was in such turmoil for the first year, because they couldn't get any grounding. Well, since then, I'm assuming he's learned his lesson. The Heritage Foundation has put together a massive list of people for Trump to fill his plum list and the other positions he can fill without congressional approval. So this is probably the part that's freaking the left out, is that Trump's going to walk in the door and be able to run things like a regular president. Other than that, not much in a way of things that are going to be pretty scary, so to speak. Uh, it gets into details about hiring and firing practices. Some of these hiring practices have been in place since the late 1800s. And the idea is to try to figure out a way to make it easier to ease out more people during a transition. Uh, One of the things you have to consider is when you're talking about government employees, especially the ones in the DC area, they're better paid than you. They've got better benefits than almost every American. They got better retirement than almost every American. Most of them have access to early retirement as early as age 55. They have minimal performance requirements, and they have a very complicated and slow firing process. People have been trying to reform this system since Carter. Uh, and essentially, they're not trying to get rid of all the bureaucrats. They're just basically trying to increase it from the current 1% that you can change walking in the door to maybe 5 to 8%. To make things worse, Obama added a partisan political test to the beginning of the civil service exam, so that they can basically spot the people who might become problems to them, the ones who aren't aligned. This is kind of stuff that probably needs to go. Now, when it gets into the various departments uh, in this Project 2025 book, uh, breaks down how the departments themselves are set up, including history of the organization and the missions. Again, not bad stuff if you're an absolute noob to understanding how government works. Um, Nothing you probably ever want to look at unless you really plan on walking in and trying to manipulate the bureaucracy. So I'm going to talk about a couple of the departments just to give you an idea what's going on. So, uh, in the Department of Agriculture, one of the big things they're talking about is pulling a lot of climate alarmism from the system. Essentially, they have the Biden administration loaded climate stuff into virtually everything. So almost everything the agriculture department does, first you have to ask the question, how does it affect the climate? Which basically means the production of food and the price of food are second and third, which isn't particularly good. Uh, Essentially, they're describing it as the Biden administration did farm to fork intervention at all levels, and they want to basically pull back on that. And that's essentially a theme that goes across the entire thing, is essentially climate has been moved into every single position of the government. One of the things they would like to do is move food support welfare, like food stamps, et cetera, move it over to Health and Human Services. Don't even want to get rid of it or reduce it, just want to move it just to reduce some of the essentially what they want is agriculture to uh, focus entirely on agriculture and not dealing with benefits to citizens. They want to enforce eligibility requirements for food stamps. They want to limit what the Department of Agriculture does to farmers and ranchers. One thing they would like to do is repeal the sugar subsidy. Essentially, there are three types of crop insurance out there, which are a little bit in the weeds, so to speak. Essentially, what they want to do is whittle that down to one type of crop insurance. And they want essentially the way the system works is farmers pay part of the crop insurance and the taxpayers pay the rest of the premium. Essentially, they want to shift it. Right now, it's 40-60 percentage wise that the farmers pay versus the taxpayers. They want to change it to 60-40 change. Uh, Another thing they want to do is in terms of school lunch, which also falls under the Department of Agriculture, and they would like to move that to Health and Human Services. There's a guideline that if any particular school district, if 40% of the students fall below the poverty line, the entire school then gets free school lunch. And what they did over time is they basically ignored the 40% rule and gone over it. Heritage is basically saying they want to go back to the 40% rule. Pretty radical stuff, huh? Okay, so let's get into the crazy stuff here. Get into the deeply frightening stuff. Yes, oh, sound effects. Yeah, they're coming. All right. So they want to eliminate the Department of Education. So a lot of this is pretty obscure stuff. Most people don't really know what the Department of Education does. Essentially, what they want to do is eliminate the Department of Education, but move most of its functions to other departments. Uh, at the same time, they want to protect the critical employees that work there that have knowledge and specialty training and allow them to move to whatever place that their function goes to. Yeah, pretty radical, huh? Um, Essentially, they want to move different functions over to some of it goes to the Department of Labor. They want the essentially funding that goes to institutions to be block granted, and things that were are supposed to be dedicated to black colleges. They want them narrowed to only go to historically black colleges and universities, as well as tribally controlled colleges. I guess apparently these grants have been spread out and they're not effective for these particular minorities anymore. Uh, they want to move programs deemed important to national security over to the Department of State, switch uh, fair value accounting from the FCRA accounting system, which I, at the top of my head, can't remember what that means. So they want to consolidate all the federal loan programs into one new program. That one utilizes income-driven repayment, or in other words, they change if you're struggling to pay your college loan, they will set the payment based on what your income is. Include no interest rate subsidies and targeted loan forgiveness. Ooh, it's like the Third Reich coming right at you, isn't it? Okay, so talk a little bit about the Department of Energy, and I titled this one "MIGO." acronym that's my eyes glaze over. Uh, this section was really brutal to go over. As you'll see over and over again through the plan, they want to depoliticize the department. One of the big problems they thought was that the Biden administration was focusing on green over efficiency. They want to switch it back to efficiency. So basically, if something's green and efficient, it's good. If it's basically going to cost more to put it up than what it's worth, then you should be sticking with something that's more tried and true. They want to speed up the nuclear power application process. And that's really a good feel for it. You, I do have more of this because I actually went through the whole thing because I was desperately hoping something would jump out at me as being over the top or radical. And really, the Department of Education is probably as far out as they go. And if you have any grasp of how well our Department of Education is done, you wouldn't be so defensive over it. Essentially, since its creation, our school education system wasn't ranked #1 in the world, and as of today, it's ranked 24th in the world. So it's not doing well. We spend more on education and per student than most other countries. Many countries who are outperforming us. So, do we want to see more Project 2025, or is that enough? uh, so, if you have anything specific in there that you're looking for, throw it in the comments section, and I'll focus on that. If I don't get much response on this, I won't follow up on it, but I have probably about 2 more videos worth of this if people are really interested. But sorry, it's not as exciting as people want it to be. So it's political nonsense. Have any of you read actual Project 2025 and not read the memes that are just popping up claiming doom and destruction? Did you get the same feel from it that I did? If you came up with something completely different, please let me know. Smash the like button. If the YouTube algorithms brought you here and you're not a regular subscriber, please consider subscribing. Look at my other titles. I get into a lot of different stuff. And if you know someone who might find this interesting, please share it with them. Thank you for spending time with me this evening. Hope to see you again in a future video.